Months of preparation and weeks of specific planning were coming to a climax in the early hours of January 17, 1991. A powerful force of Allied countries, led by the United States, was about to launch the attack on Iraq and Iraqi troops that had taken neighboring Kuwait. A war was about to begin. A war unlike any in history. A war where modern technology would catch up with military theory. The first war where air power almost exclusively would decide the outcome. Modern air combat evolved from America's experience in Vietnam, where air power was massive but comparatively ineffective. Early in the Vietnam War, air combat took a heavy toll on U.S. fighters, and U.S. aircraft strike capabilities against ground targets were crude compared with what has evolved since. As the Vietnam War progressed, the tactics planners and aircraft and weapon systems designers learned. Air power effectiveness slowly improved, but it wasn't until after Vietnam, in the mid to late 70s, that a new generation of aerial fighting machines came into being. Lethal fighters and strike aircraft, products of the computer age that could attack with pinpoint accuracy day or night, from near and far, could outmaneuver missiles, and could be kept reliable and ready for combat in any location. Air combat training methods were totally overhauled. Rigorous exercises like those of the Navy's Top Gun School at Fightertown, Miramar Naval Air Station in San Diego, California, and the Air Force's Red Flag at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada became widespread. This new generation of aircraft, with improved methods for combat flying, is the core of today's air arsenal for the Air Force, Navy, and Marines. 40 different aircraft types were involved in the Gulf War. Among them, the F-15C, a twin-engine single-pilot jet with the primary mission of air superiority. It cleared the skies of Iraqi fighters in the early days of the war, relying on radar-guided and heat-seeking missiles. And even after air superiority was attained, they patrolled continuously during the war to assure enemy aircraft stayed grounded. The F-111, a swing-wing strike aircraft that first saw service late in the Vietnam War, used its infrared radar and laser targeting systems for pinpoint attacks in key military facilities and ultimately on individual field weapons. Pilots flying the F-111s picked off over 1,500 tanks. The F-A-18 is the Navy's latest fighter strike aircraft. It's designed to switch quickly from air combat to ground attack capabilities and back again, and carries a wide variety of missiles, bombs, and guns. In 1989, night fighter versions of the single-seat airplane went into operation. The F-A-18's computerized flight control system adapts to the selected mission to enhance tracking for ground attack and maneuverability for air combat. The Gulf War was the first time this dual-role fighter had been used in combat. The F-15E is based on the F-15 Air Superiority Fighter, but incorporates a cockpit for a crew of 2 and has the latest in night navigation, weapons targeting, and radar systems. It is the newest fighter in the Air Force fleet, first delivered for use in 1988. Its laser targeting systems guided smart bombs into Scud missile sites, command centers, airfield bunkers, and hundreds of other targets. The F-16 is a single-engine, single-pilot fighter designed as a lightweight, simple but extremely agile air combat and attack aircraft. Its weapons carrying ability is limited, but its success rate as an attack aircraft during the Gulf War made it a critical player. About 250 F-16s were sent to the Gulf, and they flew day and night, 13,500 missions, more than any other type of aircraft, and concentrating on targets in occupied Kuwait. But the real star of the Gulf War, and a surprise star at that, was the stealth fighter, the F-117A. It had been shrouded in secrecy since it entered Air Force service in 1983. In fact, It wasn't until late 1988 that its existence was officially acknowledged. Built by Lockheed, the Dart-like airplane has a single seat and 2 engines. Relying on materials, design, elaborate electronics, and special flight techniques, the airplane presents a minimal target on radar. In fact, according to sources, the stealth fighter's radar image on even the most elaborate radars is smaller than that of a small bird. In December of 1989, 2 of the 60 stealth fighters had their first taste of combat. During the U.S. invasion of Panama, 2 F-117As flew a nighttime mission over Rio Hato and dropped 2 2,000-pound bombs to disorient Panamanian troops before a base there came under attack by Army Rangers. There were questions about the accuracy of that bombing, and the airplane systems were refined and pilots intensified their training in use of the targeting equipment aboard. In April of 1990, the first films of the airplane were released, and the public finally got a view of the airplane. It made selected appearances at air shows across the United States that summer. But armed guards kept crowds at a distance, and this angular, Darth Vader-looking aircraft remained an enigma, and in fact bore the brunt of many skeptics' jokes. Shortly after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, more than 40 of the 60 stealth fighters headed for Saudi Arabia with a stopover at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And on the first night of the war, stealth fighters led the attack, one of them dropping the first bomb of the war through the roof of an air defense control center. The airplane caught Iraqi defenses totally by surprise and was the sole aircraft permitted to attack targets in downtown Baghdad. As the war progressed, the generals knew that the F-117A was rewriting the books on aerial warfare. Dozens of other U.S. and coalition forces aircraft participated. The AV-8B Harrier, a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft flown by U.S. Marines, jumped across the border several times each day for brief strike missions against Iraqi targets. Tornadoes, built jointly by companies in Britain, Germany, and Italy, were key attackers in the Gulf War, flown by the Royal Air Force to attack Iraqi airfields and disable runways with cluster bombs. AWACS aircraft, or Airborne Warning and Control Boeing E-3s, stuffed with electronics and radar gear, watched over the battlefield every second and helped guide the air battles. 4 of them were in the air at all times during the war. Controllers aboard each, watching displays of radar that searched out hundreds of miles, helped direct most of the 110,000 combat and support air sorties during the war. While AWACS monitored the battle in the air, E-8 Joint Stars painted a picture of Iraqi troop movements on the ground. 2 of these new surveillance target attack radar system aircraft, still undergoing testing in the U.S., were rushed to the Gulf just before the air war began. Equipped with multi-mode radars and sophisticated computer processing equipment, they were able to track tanks and other moving targets deep behind enemy lines. This information was rapidly relayed by Joint Stars operators to ground commanders and then to strike aircraft pilots. Fuel tankers, as many as 180 at a time, flew nearby and over Iraq, allowing on occasion combat missions that endured for nearly 10 hours, longer than any in previous air wars. The venerable B-52 bombers, veterans of over 30 years of service, dropped thousands of tons of bombs on Iraqi troops. While the tactical importance of this bombing was minimal, the psychological impact proved immense and led to the large-scale surrender of Iraqi troops. A-10s, nicknamed the Warthog, a low-level strike aircraft, killed hundreds of tanks, strafed troops, gunned down helicopters, and fired Maverick missiles for devastating impact. Helicopters, notably the Army AH-64 Apache, decimated Iraqi armored columns, particularly during the 100-hour ground war that followed on the heels of the 40-day air attack. And there were many others. including the transports involved in the massive airlift that supported Desert Shield and Desert Storm. That airlift, with giant Air Force C-5s playing the principal role, proved to be the speediest and most extensive movement of people and equipment in history. It had been almost 2 decades since the U.S. had been at war. In the Gulf, war planners designed a hard-hitting air attack as the opening salvo. In the second week of January, the man who handled daily planning of the air campaign and was the number 2 officer overseeing the air war, Major General Buster Glosson, began a series of personal visits to pilots who would be going to war.
In this case, I felt that we owed it to those aircrew members to explain to them how important each of their individual missions would be and what would happen or what would be the repercussions if they failed, and also what would be the benefits if they succeeded. And quite candidly, to give them the opportunity to come to grips themselves with going to war and putting their life on the line, which for many of them was the first time that had ever occurred. When we reached the point that I refer to as no return, when the President made the decision to go to war, and then when we reached the point of the first Tomahawk coming out of the tube and the first 117 not being recallable, then we can't turn back. You can't say that the war is going to end in the next few minutes, or you hope the war doesn't occur. The war is now started. And so all the things that are bad about war and all the things that are so deplorable were in essence beyond your control at that point. I will never forget the feeling I had at that time.
Over 2,000 coalition aircraft were assembled and going into action. The successes started to mount. Initially, the air attack followed a detailed plan.
I think it's fair to say that the first 24 hours was as close to being scripted as any air campaign has ever been. And the changes that we made were changes only as a result of weather. And after the first 24 hours, or I should say during the first 24 hours, we then started making some minor changes to the second 24 hours that was also scripted. And it was not until we had gone through 48 hours were we actually starting with a non-script, so to speak.
From that point on, planning for the 3,000 or so daily air sorties began about 36 hours in advance. The air war goals were specific. Lieutenant General Charles C. Horner commanded all air operations.
First thing we had to do was seize control of the air. That was fundamental to everything we did. Then we had the obligation to take out his nuclear, biological, and chemical capabilities, isolate the central leadership of the country from the forces in the field, isolate those forces in the field by knocking down bridges and their ability both to resupply the battlefield and flee from the battlefield. And then finally, we needed to take out those systems that could inflict casualties on our friendly ground forces, armor and artillery.
Captain Steve Tate piloted an F-15C and was part of the first attacking wave. Tate and his wingmen took off from Tehran at 1:30 on the morning of January 17th. They refueled near the Iraq border and then headed for Baghdad to provide air cover over a swath of territory extending from Baghdad to about 60 miles east. A line of attack aircraft almost 100 miles long followed them into the war.
Baghdad was a really pretty city that night. As we started flying over the populous areas, about 60 miles south of Baghdad, all of a sudden the F-117 started dropping their bombs, and then you started getting concussions all over the entire country. You could see it. At that point, then the sky started lighting up with the AAA. And when I first saw it, it looked like just little sparkles going off all over, and I figured we had some kind of cosmic weapon system out there just sprinkling all over this city as I'm looking off at it. And it didn't even dawn on me. And then I started, looking a little bit closer, and I said, man, that's the AAA that they're shooting.
The stealth fighters, the F-117As, led the attack that night, as they did frequently during the 42-day war, and began to prove their ability to sneak in undetected by enemy radar. stealth technology returned a lost element to aerial warfare, the element of surprise. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Getchell commanded a squadron of F-117As during the war in the Gulf.
In the Desert Storm Air Campaign, we flew 1,271 combat sorties. About a third of those sorties were over downtown Baghdad. We were the only aircraft allowed to fly over downtown Baghdad, and we did so without receiving a scratch during the entire war.
But the attacking F-117As did encounter anti-aircraft fire.
In downtown Baghdad, where they had an established integrated air defense network early on, that they had a little bit of warning because they had a lot of listening posts, some as simple as a guy in a light AAA piece outside of town listening for jet noise. He hears jet noise, he shoots tracers, they shoot. On a lot of targets, especially as the war progressed and we were able to beat the IADs down, we were able to achieve complete surprise and wouldn't see any fire at all until the bombs actually impacted the target, which means you're halfway in or halfway through, and that worked very well.
We have had a revolution in aerial warfare. There's no doubt about it. The stealth technology worked probably better than even I thought it would. When you think that those airplanes night after night after night went to the most heavily defended target in the world, probably in Baghdad, with all the thousands of guns and hundreds of SAMs, and came back without taking a scratch, that has to be a revolution.
While Iraqi defenses were ineffective against the stealth fighters, Iraq initially tried to use its air force to gain control of their skies and to counterattack. The Iraqi Air Force comprised a mix of over 600 fighters. Among them were Mirage F-1 fighters. As early as 1981, Iraq had begun assembling a fleet of the French-built fighters. And as the Gulf War dawned in 1991, Iraq had about 100 of them, many equipped for long-range strike missions, a capability used repeatedly during Iraq's war with Iran. Most of the rest of the modern fighters were Soviet MiG-29s. The airplane's high degree of maneuverability had been repeatedly demonstrated at flying displays outside the Soviet Union in recent years. The airplane's flight controls are operated by a less sophisticated mechanical system than the computer-driven fly-by-wire systems in contemporary U.S. and European fighters. However, Western experts who've evaluated its flying report the MiG-29 in many ways matches the best the West has to offer. Iraq had nearly 40 of them at the outset of the war. Their other active fighters were earlier MiG models, including the large and powerful MiG-25, capable of almost Mach 3 speeds. MiG-23s, Flogger E and F models, single-seat air combat fighters with variable sweep wings, are export versions of a fighter first put into service in the Soviet Union in 1970 and later sold to Iraq. And MiG-21s, the backbone of their fleet with various models of the small jet, were in operation by Iraq since the early 1970s and updated continually since. Ironically, as Iraq readied its MiG-21s for war, a privately owned MiG-21 in the U.S. was flying at air shows that same summer of 1990. Also in the Iraqi fleet was the lethal Sukhoi Su-25, codenamed Frogfoot. This heavily armored, low-level strike aircraft had proved deadly when used by the Soviets in their war in Afghanistan. Iraq was the first non-Warsaw Pact nation to get Su-25s, and not much was known about them until they were unveiled to Western experts in 1989. Against the Iraqi fleet, coalition forces set out to gain dominance of the skies in the first hours of the war. Principally, squadrons of F-15Cs were assigned to clear the skies. F-15As and Cs, single-seat fighters, have been in operation since the mid-1970s. The airplane's focus is air combat, and it's designed for maximum effectiveness in a fight at just under supersonic speeds at about 30,000 feet. It routinely carries 2 radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow missiles and 2 heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinders, and its computerized radar can track and engage several aircraft targets at the same time. It was in F-15Cs that Captain Steve Tate and his wingmen set off on the first night of the war to eliminate any Iraqi aircraft threats. They led a wave of coalition attack airplanes on its way up from the south. And it was near Baghdad, in the first hour of the war, flying with wingman Bo Merlack, that things started getting tense for Tate.
I finished my turn. I locked up a contact about 16 miles off my nose. Talking to AWACS on who this, what the airplane is, who it is. They didn't have a good idea and a feel for what the airplane was at that time, and I'm getting all my systems to work. About 12 miles in front of me, it met the ROE, the rules of engagement that we needed to be able to shoot at this thing, and I shot a AIM-7, a Sparrow missile at the airplane. It came off the right side, and we never really shot missiles before at night. I've shot missiles before, but in the daytime, so we didn't really know what to expect. So I kind of just like ducked my head into the radar tube to prevent any kind of blindness, flash blindness at night, and made sure that it was a bad guy and I'm not going to shoot down a friendly, which was a big concern. And as the missile went off, I just kind of checked away from it a little bit, called out to AWACS and to the rest of my flight that I had a Fox 1 on a F1.
The Airborne Control Aircraft, or AWACS, had confirmed to Tate that the target was indeed an Iraqi Mirage.
Right about this time in the missile flight, they started shooting SAM missiles at us. I was getting locked up by an IHawk, one of our own SAM sites that they stole from Kuwait when they invaded that. So I'm really nervous about that. I'm trying to look over to my left side here into Baghdad, and they're shooting. So I see some SAMs coming up. The whole sky is filled with AAA. Every side you look at, there's AAA coming up. And I turned back, I was getting ready to shoot another missile with about 2 to 3 second time of flight left before the missile impacted the airplane. The missile looked good to me. The airplane wasn't evading, so I didn't shoot. I elected not to shoot another missile at that point. If it would have missed him for some other reason, then I could have followed up with another shot very easily. But the airplane blew up, and I did a big turn away from this. The sky really lit up, and I just looked at it for a second. The airplane, could you see parts of the airplane breaking up, and then the bigger parts would break up into smaller pieces, and it's just a huge streamer of burning metal going down to the ground.
F-15Cs from 4 different Air Force units accounted for all but 2 of the 35 Iraqi fighters shot down in air combat. Iraqis scored 0 against Allied forces.
I think our success in air-to-air engagements was because of the superb equipment we have, the F-15, F-14s, F-18s, F-16, the missiles, but most of all the training our young people have today.
Since the Vietnam War, air combat training has been the #1 priority for fighter pilots at bases around the world, including the renowned U.S. Air Force Red Flag School and the United States Navy Top Gun. But now, after 20 years of practice, billions of dollars of investment, and few live engagements to validate the new training doctrine, pilots and planes face the ultimate test. Was the training realistic enough? The following sequences provide a compelling comparison. Air combat exercises like this with F-15s out of Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico go on every day. Here, Captain Mike Holmes leads 4 F-15s against 4 Air Force T-38s, which simulate MiG-21 aggressor aircraft.
I like to do the larger scenarios and get at least 4 Eagles out there together so we can work on the teamwork, not just of a 2-ship or a 2-plane working together, but combining that into 4 aircraft. Now we have 4 guys working the radio, 4 guys working the radar, and trying to make that happen. We like to have at least 4 targets so that we have to test our radar skills and our lookout skills. Today's scenario was built around T-38, simulating basically a MiG-21. We wanted to make them come up at high altitude where our airplane has a performance advantage, and then we wanted to force them into a turn and fight so we could practice flying against that smaller airplane, fighting one guy while you try to find the next guy who's jumping into the fight. We had one radar that didn't work in the flight, which unfortunately was mine. So we did some switching around in roles, and we switched leads around, and now the number 3 guy, my number 3, ends up with the lead of the fight, and his radar and the other guy's radars take us into the visual environment against the T-38. My first merge on today's fight, I was flying on the wing of my number 2 man, who has a lead because he's got the good radar. My first pickup on the T-38 was a visual pickup as they flew over the top of us. He flew over the top of my airplane and started the conversion down, and because we're at high altitude, my airplane has a maneuver and intake and his doesn't. I've got a thrust advantage, and so I was able to turn my speed initially into some turn rate, and pretty soon I'm driving an offensive advantage, although I traded some airspeed to do it. And we ended up going around about 2 360s at 20,000 feet while I'm working to get in position to use my gun. And because my radar didn't work, I want to get in close because my sight's not going to be as accurate, and I want to make sure I'm close so the bullets are actually going to hit him if I shoot. So I drive back to a position behind him. I unload my airplane to get the energy I need to go up to him because he's trying to go higher than I can get and hold me off from getting there. So I get a few extra knots of airspeed, and then I pull up with him. I'm able to point at him, and now he has to come down. And I've got the thrust advantage, so once he starts coming down, I'm driving the fight, and I'm able to saddle up behind him for a gunshot and finish that engagement.
Go uphill. Alright, that's permanent. That's permanent. We're total. That's still on the bandit. Take the left everything. Where's visual? Yeah, let's pick up right here. He's already heading here. Look. 53 has 87 square balance.
I'm combat ready, and again, I'll break that down into a couple of reasons. I've been doing the same job every day for 7 years. And I've had the benefit of all the schools that the Air Force offers in air combat training, starting with undergraduate pilot training through F-15 school, into an operational unit, off the fighter weapons school, to become an instructor in tactics and the weapons that we use in the airplane. But the most important part is I've had 7 years of doing this job every day, day after day after day.
The training is intense and seemingly very real. But in war, the missiles are armed. The stakes infinitely higher. Now, a similar engagement. The real thing this time in the skies over Iraq. 4 F-15s from the 33rd Tactical Fighter Wing encountered 3 MiG-23 floggers. You'll see and hear the flight of F-15 shoot down all 3 MiGs, as recorded from a gun camera in the lead aircraft.
Minus 310.4. Copy. So I'll take the southern. Three hits there. Copy. That's me at front south. Push it up. 4, check to 360. Okay, heads up 4, watch out so you don't shoot through me. 15 miles. Box from 1. Box from 2. 2 had to take the western man. Western man. Check low. Charlie 1, nose. Box from 3. Flash 1. Second box from 2. Okay, flash 1 from 1. Second box from 3. west north.
Merged.
2, second splash. Copy 2, west north. Slash southern.
On another occasion, F-15s from the same wing engage 2 MiG-25s, and one explodes in the pilot's field of view. Again, the engagement as recorded from the U.S. fighter.
2, 3 or 4 out. 210.
At east 5.
Bingo fuel.
5.
Bingo fuel.
1 off your nose, 1.
Bingo fuel. Bingo fuel.
Is anybody in burners? No. Everybody out of burner.
Reach 6, 5 miles.
3-4, let's push it up. Come back.
2, threat southeast 5.
We good to you, running southwest, 501.
3, threat.
Splash! Splash coming out westbound.
Coalition air forces quickly proved their air superiority, but the battlefield was deceptively large, and control of the skies had to be maintained.
You know, if you look at Kuwait, the battlefield looked pretty small, but in reality, we had to provide air defense across the whole northern tier of Saudi Arabia. So that went for distance from, say, about Boston to Omaha, Nebraska. And if you look at the distances we ranged the battlefield, we had our air pulled back so it wouldn't be subject to Scud attack for the most part. And so forces that were stationed in the south to get to Baghdad, for example, had to travel the same distance as you would from, say, Brownsville, Texas, up to the Minnesota border with Canada. So it was a big area.
F-15 pilots continued to patrol the skies. Long-endurance patrol flights, sometimes 9 to 10 hours, which included up to 4 aerial refuelings, became the norm for the F-15 pilots. One of their missions came to be called MiG sweeps. An Air Force cameraman went along on one of these flights, which started late one afternoon and ended in darkness early the next morning.
Here we go.
Yes, sir.
All righty, I'm Yonder Drummond, captain in the 27th Fighter Squadron. Flying F-15s over Iraq. We're based in Dhahran. We've been here since the 8th of April, excuse me, 8th of August. That's when we deployed out of Langley and we arrived on the 9th. And we've been flying primarily defensive counter-air missions over Saudi Arabia all of 1990. When the war broke out on the 17th of January, our mission changed significantly. Since that time, we've basically had a threefold mission. Obviously, still maintaining the defensive counter-air to protect the high-value assets, the AWACS and the tankers, the rivet joints, the jammers. Additionally, we have OCA pre-strike sweep and escort missions where we're tied with a package. Primarily the packages that can't support themselves, like the F-111s, F-4Gs, EF-111s. Additionally, several F-16 packages where we escort in front, sweep for MiGs, set up caps, and cover the regress, and then protect them on the way back. And the third leg of our mission is what we did today. Today has been a MiG sweep. We've taken off, gone to the central region of Saudi Arabia. And we're going to a turn right here. We take our gas, and we're basically tied to nobody. We go straight up into Iraq and sweep the airfields, utilizing minimum communication so as to not reveal our position, and sweep for any fighter activity or helicopter activity for that matter. That is Khalil Airfield. The hills and then going into the mountains is the border of Iran. So we're just skirting right along it. The real name of that is Numania or something like that. It's pretty Iraqish. Oh, those are parachute flares. That's what they are. They're dropping. Those are parachute flares from like an A-10 or somebody. They're illuminating the ground so that they can see what they're going to now go in and target. It's pretty cool. They may be in there strafing with their guns. it's a shame you can't go on an escort mission, because then you're guaranteed to see fireworks. That's what they ought to try to work for next time.
Several hours after takeoff, the MiG sweep ends, and it's back to the base. But where this mission leaves off, many others follow to maintain control of Iraqi skies. The threat from Iraq's Air Force diminished. MiG-29s and other fighters fled across the border to Iran in what some suggested was a desperate attempt by Saddam Hussein to save the best of his Air Force for future battles. Still, anti-aircraft batteries and surface-to-air missiles continued to target attacking coalition aircraft. But the stealth fighters continued to deliver deadly blows night after night. While it's called a fighter, it's really a light bomber. A whole new class of weapons was used for the first time in a full-fledged war by the U.S. forces. Laser-guided bombs, including one most predominantly delivered by stealth fighters, the GBU-27, with 2,000 pounds of explosive power. Put simply, the pilot, usually at night using infrared sighting devices, pinpoints a target in the crosshairs and shoots a laser beam at the target. The laser stays pointed on the target even as the airplane continues to move. When the aircraft has maneuvered to within the release envelope for the bomb, it's dropped. The bomb's sensors hone in on the laser spot, and fins on the bomb move to direct its path to the designated spot. The system worked with uncanny accuracy. For TV viewers watching the news of the war at home, some of the most intriguing and remarkable early footage of the attack came from infrared video cameras that were part of the laser targeting systems. And it was the shot of the bomb dropping into the yard-square air shaft that really focused the public's attention on this new technology. Initially, targets included air defense sites, command and communication centers. As the war progressed, the stealth fighters' smart bombs took out nuclear and chemical facilities, bridges, and other strategic targets.
A point that has not gotten much publicity is the fact that we all heard about the feared fire trenches and how they were going to be filled up and how the people, the troops, the land troops, were going to have such a hard time going across them. Well, the 117s, in about 30 minutes one night, 21 of them, 3 days before the land campaign started, destroyed all of those oil supply pumps and all the distribution valves that fed into those trenches, and that's why the land forces never saw one drop of oil when they crossed the border.
F-15Es also played a critical role in the attack on Iraq's forces. The E model has the latest in night navigation, weapons targeting, and radar systems. It is the newest fighter in the Air Force fleet. First delivered for use in 1988, the airplane carried laser bombs similar to those used with the stealth fighters. Major Bill Polowitzer, an F-15E pilot from the 336th Tactical Fighter Squadron at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina.
During the Gulf conflict, our mission was initially, during the first phase of the conflict, was primarily to take out Scud missile sites.
They took out fixed Scud sites along with lots of other targets. Munition storage bunker, Western Iraq. Railroad cars. A communications tower. Highway bridge near the Iraq-Syrian border. Camouflage tank in revetment at Republican Guard position. MiG-23 on taxiway, Talil Airfield. Military planners used their largest and oldest bomber, the B-52, principally to drop bombs from high levels on Republican Guard troop positions and other area targets. Almost 26,000 tons of bombs. But even at 38,000 feet, the airplanes were at risk. B-52 pilot Lieutenant Colonel Heiberg won't soon forget the day 4 or 5 surface-to-air missiles were launched at his flight of 3 B-52s. The lead pilot warned of the threat.
Both of those explosions were close enough that it rocked the aircraft and caused the aircraft to shudder, at which time we began a little bit more aggressive evasive maneuvers. And I looked out my window after the pilot had seen a third SAM, and when I looked out, I saw one go just off to my right side, just in front of the wing, and then a second one about, what I think, about 100 yards or so to the right of the aircraft. So the maneuvering and the jamming that the EW was doing probably saved, well, he did save us from taking at least 2 more, if not 3 more hits. I wasn't too concerned about the situation until I read the maintenance report of all the near misses and the possible damage that could have been done, and the over 65 holes that were in the airplane. When I saw that, then I wish I could have had a cold drink of some kind.
Naval aviation added a major force to the region. On the Red Sea to the southwest of Iraq and on the Persian Gulf to the southeast, a total of 6 aircraft carriers were in place by the time the war began, carrying almost 500 combat aircraft. FA-18 Hornets, the dual-role fighter. F-14A Tomcats. And A-6E Intruders, all-weather strike aircraft. Throughout the war, the tempo of activity on the carriers was high. Tomcats, constantly patrolling over the seas, protected the fleet. And the strike aircraft participating in the attack on ground targets in Iraq also decimated Iraq's small navy. Commander Mike Anderson was an F-18 squadron CO and flew from the Saratoga as it sailed on the Red Sea.
Well, I think the F-18s have been significant. It's the first time the F-18's been used in combat, and I think we've validated the strike fighter concept, the multi-role aircraft being able to do a little of everything. It's right now the only Navy airplane to have shot down MiGs. It did that with 4 Mark 84s on the airplane. So it was en route to a target to deliver 4 2,000-pound bombs on a hangar in both cases, and both airplanes shot down MiGs en route within 15 miles of the target.
By the end of the war, Navy fighter and attack planes had flown 26,000 sorties, about 1/4 of the total.
The United States Navy provided 6 carriers to fight this battle, and that's a lot of firepower. The other thing that was unique is as the war shifted from across the entire country of Iraq into the Kuwaiti theater in February, we were able to reposition one of the carriers from the Red Sea over to the Arabian Gulf. The Navy did a great job. It's tough in carrier operations because you have to take into account, you know, landing, repositioning on the deck, and they call it deck cycle time. They did a great job, and I'm very pleased with the way they contributed so much.
The Army put its Apache helicopters into service in war for the first time. Their spectacular agility had been shown at air shows, but skeptics in Congress worried about their reliability in battle, particularly in the harsh environment of the Middle East. The McDonnell Douglas-built A-864 Apache, which went into service in the mid-1980s, has day and night fighting capability, using forward-looking infrared radar or FLIR for nighttime viewing of targets. Some models also carry fuel and external tanks for long-range missions. A loaded Apache weighs almost 8 tons, but its twin GE jet engines, totaling almost 3,400 shaft horsepower, give it dramatic performance. The first night of the war, the Apaches delivered the first blow by taking out radar sites along the border. And later, they relentlessly pounded Iraqi armor using laser-guided Hellfire missiles. Apaches took out tanks.
Stay with him. That's a tank.
Anti-aircraft vehicles.
Stay on it.
Construction equipment.
It's gone.
Trucks. Artillery.
He's gone.
They also used their 30mm automatic cannon on Iraqi ground targets. Chief Warrant Officers Rodney Balak and Paul Stein crewed an Apache during the war. Balak talked about their missions.
Its forte is to go out at night. It's designed for that. The FLIR devices work excellent in the desert. So by going out at night, utilizing that along with flying low, and, using maximum standoff, we were able to engage the vast majority of our targets without them being aware the direction they were being fired upon and what was engaging them. Many times when we would begin firing on a target, anti-aircraft fire would begin, but it would just be directed into the air as if they felt that they were being attacked by fixed-wing aircraft or fighter aircraft. So anti-aircraft guns were oriented upward, whereas we were real close to the desert floor engaging them. So when we saw that, then we knew that it confirmed that they didn't know where we were at.
As the war continued, targets got smaller and tougher. F-111s, initially used to bomb key installations, started going after individual tanks, or tank plinking as they called it. F-15Es, two-seat attack versions of the F-15 fighter, continued their hunt for Scud launchers. And F-16s went after helicopters and aircraft in bunkers. Three specific elements made this air attack different from those that had gone before in prior applications of air power. First, the reliance on and capability for pinpoint nighttime attack. Second, the extensive reliance on electronic warfare to mask attacks and confuse Iraq's defenders. And third, the huge volume of aerial refueling that went on continuously during the war.
One of the remarkable things when you look back at the air campaign, especially the first 2 or 3 days, is thinking about in the night over Saudi Arabia having 180 tankers and over 400 airplanes taking fuel from those tankers, going to a target, coming back and rejoining those same 180 tankers and returning to base. And I'm sure that there are a lot of pilots that will tell you that there were a lot of things that were planned very precisely. But also, there were a lot of the good Lord's hand involved in the lack of mid-airs in that case, because you cannot put that many airplanes in the air in a very, very concentrated area. Any controller will tell you that. And not have mid-airs. But we never had a single one.
From my own experience in flying in combat, and I flew primarily in North Vietnam, the F-105, my hat goes off always, surprisingly enough, to the tanker guys. They're sitting there in orbit, full of gas, blind to what's going on around them other than what AWACS tells them. And of course these fighters are zipping by, they could run into them, and you also would have the enemy get into their tanker orbits. They did a magnificent job.
The workhorse tanker for the Air Force during the Gulf War, was the KC-135. Radar imaging and targeting made night fighting possible and effective.
One of the key elements of this air campaign is that it went 24 hours, 7 days a week. The Iraqis didn't expect that. There's no doubt in my mind they thought that we would be inept at night. And in actuality, we had about a third of our force available to fly during the hours of darkness, and we used it. Obviously, we've seen the film from the F-117s. We've seen what the paved tack on the F-111 can do. What we didn't really get a good view of is what the Lantern did for the F-16s and A-10. And the AC-130 gunships were extremely effective during the Battle of Khafji as well.
The war started at night. It was primarily, from an air standpoint, fought at night. And in my opinion, it was basically won at night.
And this was an electronics war, one of jamming and confusing enemy communications and targeting more than any before it.
Probably a primary reason that we had such low casualty rates in our air operations was the fact that our electronic countermeasures proved to be very effective. We were able to blind him with regard to his warning and control systems, and we were able to defeat his SAMs both with active measures such as harm missiles and bombs, but also the ECM pods, self-defense pods on the airplane. And I think the message there is in modern warfare, electronic combat is basic to everything you do.
For 5.5 weeks, air power had been used like never before.
The things that we've been able to try to do in the past, we executed in this war. And it is no more complex than that. The American technology gave us the ability to use the doctrine that we've always had on the books and to be able to prosecute a war and save lives. And when it's all said and done, that's what it's about. Saving fighter pilots and aircrew lives and saving soldiers' lives when the national objectives say that it's time to go to war.
The doctrine was that of General Billy Mitchell, and it evolved more than 60 years earlier. Hit enemy leadership and infrastructure, and simultaneously deal with all facets of the enemy's armed forces, all from the air.
And he believed you could do that with a strategic-type bombing campaign, just as we did in the Gulf, and that in many cases it would significantly minimize and change the necessity for the brutal land fighting that we had seen that had historically become accustomed to.
But even in the Gulf, there was still a job to do. Regain control of Kuwait. The question of when to send in the ground forces had to be answered.
There's a lot been written on that and a lot been said, but it boils down to a very simple fact. And that is, General Horner and I promised General Schwarzkopf that before any soldier crossed the border of Iraq, that air would equip the land forces of Iraq by 50% in 3 critical areas: people, artillery, and tanks. Our projections had shown, based on the modeling that we had done, that should take between 4 and 6 weeks with reasonably good weather. And as history shows, that's about what it took. We were a little behind the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then we caught up near the end. And so that's why that I'm sure that General Schwarzkopf would tell you that he made the decision to start the land campaign with the President's approval when he did. But he was in control, he was the sink, and if he had needed to wait longer, he would have waited longer. Because one thing that was paramount in his vision throughout the entire war was the minimum number of casualties on the American side that he could possibly have.
Ground forces moved, and moved quickly. And in 100 hours, it was all over. U.S. air power directly contributed to the Iraqi defeat, more than in any earlier war. Victory parades welcomed the troops home. But at the Pentagon and for military experts, questions remained. What really worked, and why? What was most effective, and why? And was Desert Storm a model for future engagements? And if so, why? John Morocco, senior editor of Aviation Week and Space Technology.
Desert Storm was the perfect scenario for air power. The Middle East has always been the perfect place to employ air power because of the flat terrain. There's nowhere to hide. it's an easy scenario for air power. Air power, obviously, as we learned in Vietnam, wasn't as effective, and that was a whole different ballgame. That was dealing with an insurgency. You're dealing in a different geographical area, climate, and terrain.
Even in the Gulf, however, there were problems, particularly with precision-guided weapons. Aviation Week and Space Technology Senior Military Editor David Fulgham.
They were laser-guided, which meant that if you had bad weather, if you had smoke, if you had haze, if you had dust, you either couldn't see the target, you couldn't drop them, or they went astray. You broke lock once they were on the way, and then you don't know where that bomb's going.
Since the war, precision-guided weapons have been designed that will operate in such conditions.
It uses a combination of global positioning satellite information and INS, and all you need is a GPS coordinate on the ground, and this can be provided to you by Joint Stars aircraft.
Desert Storm's lessons can most clearly be seen in just these kinds of changes that the Pentagon has made since the war. They concentrate in 4 areas.
More emphasis on stealth, more emphasis on standoff weaponry, cruise missiles, more emphasis on precision bombing, and fourth, and perhaps the most important for the next war will be, we saw the beginnings of information warfare, of cyber warfare, offensive computer operations.
More emphasis on stealth will change the very configuration of air power.
For every actual airplane that was dropping a bomb, you would have a half dozen support aircraft or more. Now, instead of a package of 60 or 80 airplanes to hit a handful of aiming points, you're going to have small numbers of aircraft coming in. They're going to hit at strange times. They're going to hit from different directions. They're not all going to show up en masse, this huge crowd of radar reflections in the enemy's radar.
Desert Storm's 4th lesson is cyber war.
As a matter of fact, that may be the biggest element of the next war. You're gonna take out the guy's telephones. You're gonna take out his connections to the banks. You're gonna wipe out his financing. His communications to his subordinate units, and that may be the single most important thing that we saw in Desert Storm.
John Morocco.
So air power can be used effectively in various scenarios, but whether it will be the be-all and end-all or the major contributor to a military campaign, as it seemed to be in Desert Storm, is still questionable.
No matter how effective air power may have been, pilots weren't getting overconfident. Back at their bases and from the decks of their carriers, pilots jumped back into the training routine. Now, with the lessons from the Gulf War worked into the exercises. They continued the grueling, relentless training that they hoped would prepare them as well for an unforeseeable future as it had for an unexpected air war a few months before.